We're joined by Andrew Danieri, the Eurasia Centre of the Atlantic Council. Welcome to TVP World, and thank you for taking the time, Mr. Danieri.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you. So, Jens Stoltenberg mentioned a substantial package. What's it likely to include?
So I think the big package that Stoltenberg talked about at the NATO summit will include, at a minimum, major air defense assets in support of Ukraine to protect against the kind of attacks we saw yesterday, Russian missiles directed at a children's hospital, a civilian object, not a military installation. Again, that's at a minimum. I expect we'll also see some more pledges on artillery and ideally on major long-range rocket systems like the U.S.-made ATACMS, things like that. Possibly, it'd be nice to see the Germans send their own long-range rockets. I think that's probably a bit out of the question for now, unfortunately. But again, we do expect an announcement of major military material that ideally would give Ukraine or go some way to providing Ukraine with the qualitative military edge that they need.
Right. What about this long-term financial commitment to support Ukraine, a part of what some people call Trump-proofing of NATO?
Well, long-term commitments are great. I mean, Ukraine has to prepare in the short term to fight Russia today, tomorrow, and, of course, the day after that. But I think many of us now expect that this war will drag on for a number of years, despite growing calls for a so-called ceasefire or so-called negotiations. And I think the long-term commitments from NATO allies reflect that they understand that Ukraine will need major Western support, not only over the short term, but over the medium and long term. And if they're to effectively fight off Russian aggression and to win the war against Russia, they'll need to be able to plan for that long term. And that's exactly what these long-term packages and security agreements that Ukraine has been doing bilaterally with a number of countries, that's what they guarantee.
Right, but at the same time, so far, Jens Stoltenberg has failed in convincing NATO members to agree to this long-term aid. So why would this change now? Or perhaps it will be replaced, as you've mentioned, by bilateral agreement?
Yeah, I meant initially that these packages are, the intent of them is very clear. Now, of course, Secretary General Stoltenberg, he's the outgoing Sec Gen now, and so it does look unlikely that his idea will be able to get consensus among allies. And I think partially in response to that is why we're seeing these bilateral short and long-term agreements being made between Ukraine and its partners bilaterally, and that includes the United States, of course, just a few weeks ago, but also much more recently with Poland, a major show of solidarity symbolically, but also on a real military level, giving Ukraine what they need to keep the fight up and to ideally take back more territory from Russia.
Now, Andrew, I mean, we've been hearing the democratic countries saying since the start of this part of the war in 3 years ago, almost, that, they would be supporting Ukraine, but it's been painfully slow. And as a result of that, Russia's been able to dig in and basically take over 20% of the country. Is the summit going to speed things up?
Well, that's absolutely the right criticism to level, especially at countries like the United States and some of our main partners in Western Europe, that eventually the White House has gotten to the right place on sending certain weapons to Ukraine and allowing Ukraine to strike certain targets. But as you rightly say, it's taken far too long. And not only has it cost thousands of lives, civilians and otherwise on the battlefield, it's also put Ukraine in a worse position militarily and strategically. And so while the Biden administration has done an excellent job in mobilizing support for Ukraine, they could do a lot better in moving faster and in providing Ukraine what they need before they say no, 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 and then get to yes. I think it's possible that the summit could produce, again, more coordination, like things like the NATO Ukraine Council that have actually worked in speeding up getting Western military aid to Ukraine. But I expect coming out of the summit, there'll be more announcements of materiel that will be sent to Ukraine. But I think the proof will be in the pudding whether that stuff gets more quickly to the battlefield where it needs to be.
And so do you think that part of the blame lies with the leadership and perhaps someone from the CE region should join NATO's leadership? There's much talk about the next Deputy Secretary General. Who do you think that will be, or perhaps from which country will that person come from?
Well, I think the name on everyone's lips is Mark Rutte, the former leader of the Netherlands, to be the next Secretary General of NATO. He was here, I think, over a year ago in Washington.
Sorry, the Deputy Secretary General, I think, yeah.
Oh, Deputy Secretary General.
Yes.
Deputy Secretary General, there's, I think, a little bit more, not confusion, but it's a little bit not quite as transparent as to who that will be. We would expect that to be another forward-leaning person, exactly like Prime Minister Rutte, who's been very strong in his support for Ukraine and in ramping up not only Western, but especially European support for Ukraine.
Understood. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Danieri, for coming along and sharing your analysis of what's going on at this summit. And come back and see us again shortly. Have a good day.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.